Have you heard of the Waverly Hills Sanitarium? I'm sure if you've heard of some of the stories that make its way through the halls today. Well, I would like to tell you about how that sanatorium got started, the tuberculosis outbreak that tore through the halls like a knife tearing through paper, and the haunting stories that still linger in the halls today. Now let's begin. How did it all start? Well, in 1883, Major Thomas H. Hayes purchased a lot of land and built a one-room school on it for his only daughter. After he built the school, he hired a woman by the name of Lizzie Lee Harris and let her name the school. Well, she named the one-room school Waverly School, based off a group of novels that she enjoyed called the Waverly Novels. Well, Major Hayes liked the name so much that he decided to name the lot that it sat on Waverly Hill. Now that you know the basics of the beginning of how Waverly Hill got its name, I would like to discuss the tuberculosis outbreak that ran rampage. Now, what is tuberculosis? Tuberculosis is a disease of the lungs. At this time, there was no treatment. It also has the name of consumption. The reason why it's called consumption is because it consumes your whole body. It leaves you a fragile being of what you once were, and then you die. Well, on July 26th, 1910, the doors opened for the first time. Originally, the hospital was only supposed to hold about 50 patients max, but as the epidemic grew, so did the hospital. At the end of the hospital's reign, it was able to hold at least 400 patients. While the hospital was open, there were many different experimental procedures that were practiced on the patients to try to help them get over the tuberculosis. One of those procedures was a balloon being placed in your lungs and then inflated so that your lungs expanded, and hopefully that would help you breathe better. Another risky procedure was having several, if not all of your ribs removed, and that would give your lungs more room to expand. Unfortunately, these procedures were not good for the patients, and not only did the patients die from the procedures and recovering from the procedures, but they also died of the tuberculosis. Which brings me to the body chute. The body chute is a tunnel that's in the hospital that had the original purpose of letting the nurses and doctors hospital, especially in the cold days, so that they didn't have to trudge through the snow. They could just walk through the tunnel and get to the doors. Well, they didn't want the patients that were there to get scared because of how many deaths were happening, so they used that tunnel and turned it into a body chute where they took the dead and they brought it down through that tunnel to the railroad tracks at the end. In 1961, an antibiotic was finally created, and in 1962, the sanatorium was quarantined and shut down. Now, here's a quote from David Gorin as he told Vintage News in 2016. The highest total number of deaths possible over the 50 years was approximately 8,000. Now, that is the size equivalence of a large town. Now that you know about the tuberculosis outbreak and how it decimated many people that were there, I would like to tell you about the haunting history that still lingers in the shadowy hallways. There's so many ghost stories in the world, it's hard not to think about what's real and what's not. Do you believe in ghosts? There was a little boy that was named Timmy. He was between the ages of 6 and 10, but nobody knows for sure. They say if you bring toys for Timmy to play with and you set them down, sometimes they'll move. And you can hear laughter as a child is playing with these toys. Now, there's another room and it's room 502. There was a nurse that worked in that room, and she was pregnant. Now, it was said that the nurse got pregnant by one of the doctors, and the doctor wanted nothing to do with her. So she was out of depression, she hung herself. There's also a possibility that she jumped from the window in that room, but either way, she died in room 502. After that, there was another nurse that worked in room 502, and she eventually jumped off the top of the building. When people are in that room, they say They have overwhelmingly felt sad. Here's another quote from paranormal investigator Keith Age as he was in the cafeteria. But it was after our initial inspection that we heard several footsteps around us, the sound of closing doors, and the smell of fresh baked bread. In the air, there was no logical explanations for these things. They simply happened, and several of us were there to witness them. Now, hopefully today you have learned some stuff that you did not know about the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Everywhere in the world has history. Some is good and some is bad. Today, we discussed how a one-room school got turned into a sanatorium to fight the epidemic of death and disease of tuberculosis. And then you heard the haunting stories that still roam the hallways today and left their dark mark. You may not believe in ghosts, and that's okay. Sometimes all we need are stories. Thank you.